my father, the abundance of evidence on my uncle's death, the CIA was involved, I think is beyond any dispute. If I were a prosecutor, I feel I could win that case without doing any further discovery, just because with my father, I always assumed that Sirhan killed my father. Sirhan confessed to the crime, confessed to killing him. There were 77 eyewitnesses in the room. And, and so I didn't think there was any question. And then a guy called Paul Schrade, who is one of my father's close friends, he was a deputy director of the United Auto Workers. He had recruited Cesar Chavez into the labor movement. He was standing next to my father the night that my father was killed, and he took the first bullet. So he got shot in the head by Sirhan. Sirhan was waiting at a steam table, and my father was brought through the kitchen where he was not scheduled to go. And Sirhan fired 2 shots at my father. The first one hit Paul Schrade in the head. The second one hit a door jamb behind my father, the wooden frame of the door. The LAPD later took it out of that, removed it. Then he was grabbed by 6 men, including Rayford Johnson, who was the 1960 decathlon champion, one of my father's best friends, Rosie Greer, who was part of the fearsome foursome, and 4 other guys. They pinned him against the steam table, and they took his gun hand and they pushed it away from my father, pointing the opposite way. Mm-hmm. But Rayford Johnson later told me he was trying to pry the gun out of Sirhan's hand. Sirhan's this little guy. When I met him in prison, the first thing that impressed me is how tiny and frail he looked. But Rayford Johnson said that he had superhuman strength. And he then fired off 6 more shots and emptied the chamber, but exactly the opposite direction of my father. And all of those shots hit people. So we know what happened to every bullet in his gun. He was always in front of my father and never got behind him. But the bullets that killed my father, according to Thomas Noguchi's autopsy report, Thomas Noguchi was the most important coroner in American history, and my father's autopsy is called the perfect autopsy. Because Noguchi knew that what had happened in Dallas with my uncle, where the autopsy was completely botched. And so he wanted to make sure nobody, to avoid all that criticism. So he flew in the chief coroner of all the armed service, every branch of the armed service, and a lot of other famous coroners, and they all sat in the theater and watched him perform the autopsy. And what his autopsy found is my father was shot 4 times from behind, never from in front. Mm-hmm. One of the shots passed harmlessly through his shoulder pad. The other 3, 2 lodged in his back. The other one was right behind his ear. And that in each case, they were contact shots, meaning the barrel of the gun was touching his skin or half an inch from it. And they left carbon tattoos. And they all had an upward angle, so that whoever was doing it was standing behind my father and holding the gun, not directly at him like that, but at an angle where you could keep him closer.
So it was almost like
the guy who was in that position is a guy called Eugene Thain Cesar, and he was a security guard who was hired 2 days before. When my father's schedule was already known.
So now he's walking through this kitchen, which he shouldn't be walking through. He's got this security guy.
He grabbed the security guard is the guy who steered him into the ambush.
That's what I'm saying.
He had my father's elbow, and he was directing him. And then, Sirhan starts firing. My father then falls back, and he lands on Cesar. And
wait, Eugene is, what's his last name?
Eugene Thain Cesar.
Thain Cesar.
Thain,
Thain Cesar, yeah.
And my father must have known he was being shot from behind, because the last thing he did is rotate and turn and pull off the clip-on tie that Cesar had on.
Wow. Get the fuck
If you see the original early pictures before my mother took that out and put a rosary in his hand, but he has that tie in his hand, and there's pictures of Cesar from that night that don't have a tie on. Cesar was was seen by all the eyewitnesses with his gun drawn. When he pushed my father off, he had his gun drawn. He was asked by the police, why did you have your gun drawn? And he said, I was shooting at Sirhan, but there's no evidence of that. And then he was caught in multiple lies about what he did with the gun. The police did not take the gun from him that night. There was
a gun that was fired at the scene, and the police
the police did not take it. And they, the police also destroyed all the photos before trial. They collected every photo taken in that room, 2,200 photos, and destroyed them all.
Who hired Eugene?
He was hired by a company called A Security, but he had a real job. His real job was at the Boeing plant, and he had a high security clearance. He was allowed in the top secret parts of the plant. Before that, he had worked for Hughes Engineering, which, Howard Hughes was very much, the guy Robert Mayhew, who is his deputy, was deeply involved in the JFK assassination. Now, here's what happens next. A guy shows up as Sirhan's lawyer. It's an attorney who is at that point involved in the Friars Club case. Do you know what the Friars Club is? It's a club.
I know the Friars Club in New York, but
yeah, the original one is in L.A. and it was famous because the Rat Pack, Joey Bishop, Frank Sinatra, all of those guys, Sammy Davis, Dean Martin, were all members. And it was run by Mickey Cohen, who's the Mafia chief, and Johnny Roselli, who was...
Roselli was the Cuba guy.
He was the liaison.
Yeah.
And so...
we need the red string.
They have a lawyer,
and the wall full of pictures.
Their lawyer, or Mickey Cohen's lawyer, shows up.
Mickey Cohen is Alcatraz, right? He's the guy.
Mickey Cohen is the Mafia boss in
L.A. Yeah, they've been in a bunch of movies. Yeah. Okay, wow.
And the lawyer has been indicted because in the Friars Club, it turns out that the Mafia had secret
recording.
They had a television camera. They had cameras on the roof of the Friars Club, and they were looking at everybody's cards and fixing the games. And then it's a famous trial that took many weeks in LA. In that trial, it comes out that the defense, the mob lawyers, had obtained the grand jury testimony, which is completely illegal. You go to jail for a long time for that. This attorney was charged with that. He's under a lot of stress. He's trying the case for the Mafia that he doesn't want to lose. And he's charged with stealing the grand jury testimony. And he somehow finds time to show up and represent Sirhan. So he goes, so he's Sirhan's lawyer.
So you think...
And he tells Sirhan, you got to plead guilty. And then he buries all of the forensic evidence, all the ballistic evidence, which if there's no way Sirhan could have been convicted because the bullets that were in my father did not match the bullets that were in other people. They didn't come from the same gun.
13 shots fired. Sirhan's gun only holds 8.
Exactly.
So we know that it's not like he's reloading.
And there's recordings. There's audios of it, of the 13 shots.
Wow. So this
anyway, it's a lot of circumstantial evidence. It's not the kind of evidence that we...
I think that's solid.
It is
but
circumstantial.
You said with your uncle,
with my uncle, it's just black and white. But with my father, it's circumstantial. So you cannot definitively say, but you can say there's a lot of... there's a lot of...
Wait, why is it so black and white with your uncle?
I hate to move...
you know what? It would take me 3 days to go through the evidence, to even give you the tip of the iceberg. People who are genuinely curious about my uncle's assassination, the CIA involvement, should read a book. There are many books, but I think the best one is a book called The Unspeakable by Jim Douglas. And what he's done is he's taken this mountain of evidence and he's distilled it all, and it's riveting. It's very, very easy to read, and it's really fascinating. And I think it's impossible to read that book and come away without thinking that the CIA killed JFK.
Okay. Is it possible that any kind of mind-altering experiments or substances were used in both cases? Like you've heard of MK Ultra.
Oh yeah, well, MK. That's interesting that you say that because
didn't Sirhan say that he
believes that he was hypnotized, and the defense, even the San Quentin psychiatrists, the defense and prosecution scientists all said it was hypnotized. And I'm not arguing this because I really don't know. I'm just saying that there's a lot of fishy stuff about this. But there's a guy called Dan Martin who teaches at Harvard Medical School.
Got him. You got it.
And he is the world's expert on hypnosis. And he's been in to hypnotize Sirhan many, many, many times. And he said, I've talked to him. He said there's 4 classes of people in hypnosis. I don't know any of this, but I think it's number 1 is the people who simply cannot be hypnotized. And then 4 is people who are the easiest to hypnotize. And he told me this, he said Sirhan's like 4.9. And he said that that when he goes into Sirhan, he takes out a coin and shows it to Sirhan, and Sirhan immediately goes out. And he said his head flips back, and snot starts pouring out of his nose, so it's involuntary, and his eyes roll up. And then he gives them a post-hypnotic suggestion, and the suggestion, for example, he'll say to him, when after I wake you up, if I ever show you a handkerchief, I want you to climb on the roof of the cell. Then he'll wake him up, and he will he'll wait a while, and he'll fool with a handkerchief, and Sirhan will start climbing on the cell. He said, if you ask Sirhan, why are you doing that? He said, I just need the exercise. He'll deny that he's been hypnotized. So I'm not, this gets really deep into sort of conspiracy, and I am not arguing that this happened.
You're saying these things are also true.
What?
You're saying these things are also true.
These are true, and you can make of them what you will, but, and there's a lot of other, really, really interesting parts of the story that are, that are fishy.
And it's not circumstantial to you. It's black and white. I could prove this in a court of law if given the opportunity.
Well, Sirhan, no. Sirhan is totally, to me, it's all circumstantial. There's no, no confessions, none of that. But with my uncle, I think it's black and white.
Are you scared at all?
That's my question.
If you do get into power, that this same circumstance will happen to you?
Well, I'm not scared. But I'm also not stupid about it. I know that what I'm doing is, challenging trillions of dollars of financial interests and power interests. And
the CIA
a lot of those
specifically,
people,
which,
Yeah, the CIA, other interests too. Oh, I know, and so I'm not stupid. I take precautions. I do things that I don't want to do. I don't,
Like, for example?
Well, I don't like a guy following me when I go to the bathroom, right?
Right.
And I want to get out, and, if there's people in a supermarket, I have these arguments with my team all the time. I said, I wanted to go out. They had this big van. I gave a speech down in Bed-Stuy this week, 2 days ago, and there was a van outside that the DNC is paying that has, that has slanders about me, running in lights. It's one of those moving billboards that is constantly changing. I want to go outside and talk to the driver, and also get my picture taken in front of the van, right?
Great
idea. And
they say no to that?
Yes, my security team wouldn't let me do that. There are certain things they say you can't do that. And I got to do what they tell me to do, because otherwise they'll pull it.
Do they charge you extra because you're like a high risk, like assassination?
No, Gavin DeBecker would give it to me for free.
Right.
Because he loves me, and
Yeah.
he
But I'm saying the security guys.
he's
that are
very
here.
supportive, and he runs the company. But he can't, because I can't take anything for free, so I have to pay the full fare. So that's what I'm doing.
Wow.
So nobody can give it to me for free.
What happened to this guy Eugene, the security
Oh,
guard?
yeah.
It's interesting. He went to, and the whole story is fascinating, because actually Sirhan worked at a track that apparently I think it was in the name of Dina De Laurentiis, but the true owner was Mickey Cohen, and he worked at a horse track. And at that horse track, they were the stable boys and the walker. He was a walker. He'd never been on a horse before. And the trainers were all experimenting with hypnosis on their lunch breaks, their different breaks. So they were all, hypnotizing each other. And, who knows what happened? Maybe it was a screening, issue there. But I'll just tell you one other interesting fact. You mentioned MK Ultra. Well, one of the hospitals that apparently was used MK Ultra was, I think it was a naval base. There was a naval infirmary in Pasadena. Sirhan, one day they said to Sirhan, we want you to get on the horse. He'd never been on any horse, and they were going to put him on a thoroughbred and have him race around a quarter-mile track. Obviously, he falls off. He hits his head on the rail. He's brought to the Pasadena hospital.
Get the fuck out of here.
And his memory is that he stayed in that hospital for 3 months. But when his appeals attorney went to the hospital and got his records, it said he got 4 stitches and was discharged in an hour.
Wow.
And he has very vivid memories of what took place in this hospital. He said there were other people from the track who were also there that had bandages on their heads. Oh, again, this is stuff he says,
Right.
and I'm not assigning any credibility to it. I'm just, it's part of this, it's part of this, a lot of the questions that I would like to ask people that were never asked of people.
There's a lot of women that complain about gaslighting from their boyfriends.
Yeah.
Nobody has been gaslit more than the Kennedy family. I mean, how do you stay sane? Like, there is one narrative that is constantly being pushed out in media, in film, in television, and then there's another completely plausible narrative that you and your family are investigating.
My family's not investigating. My family does
is-
not want anything to do with
They
it.
just accept it?
It was so shattering to my siblings and to my, and if you were not around when we were kids, but for maybe 20 years, the Zapruder films were played almost as a loop on
So
television.
you have to watch this.
And when those came on in my household, the TVs were turned off. Everybody was so devastated by this, and they don't want to, nobody's nothing you do is going to bring my father back. Nothing is going to bring my uncle back. My father, the first day when my uncle was killed, I came home from school. My mother picked us up early, and my father was walking in the yard with John McComb, who was the head of the CIA. And he was the first person to get over there because the CIA is only half a mile from my house. And McComb used to come there every afternoon and swim in the pool. But as soon as the first thing they did, my dad did when he learned that his brother, when J. Edgar Hoover told him his brother was shot, on the telephone, as he called up the CIA and said, the desk officer, and said, "Did your people do this?"
Wow.
He asked the same question to John McComb. John McComb, had been, my uncle had fired Alan Dulles and Richard Bissell and Charles Cabell, the guys who had orchestrated the Bay of Pigs, because they lied to him. And he said, "I want to take the CIA and shatter it into 1,000 pieces and scatter it to the winds." He fired them, and they brought in, my uncle originally wanted my father to run the CIA because he thought it's such a mess and only Bobby can fix it. My grandfather had stepped in and said, "You can't do that. You can't have your brother running the spy agency. It's like Stalin and Molotov. You can't have the brother of a president of the United
American
States
people want
running.
something. Yeah.
It's just terrible optics for the whole world.
Yeah.
You don't
Smart.
want that."
Smart.
So they brought in John McCone, who was like a Republican business guy, very pious Catholic, and he ran it. But nobody ever told him anything. So, you know, the whole sort of bureaucracy that's under, he doesn't know what's going on. And then my father then called one of the Cuban big leaders, a guy called Harry Ruiz, who was very close to my family, and was in a hotel room in Washington, D.C., with a famous writer who wrote the book on the Bay of Pigs. And my father said to him, "Did your guys do this?" So that was his first instinct. And then, you know, he then didn't talk about it until a week before his election. He refused to talk about it. But you had asked about, and my family is still that way. They're still in shock. There's still PTSD in my family from what I mean, we're all there, watched my dad die, you know, a bunch of us kids were there and watched him be, you know, in Los Angeles that night. I was with my dad when he died. And it's, you know, it just is, it's too much, and they don't want to go into it. So you asked about Eugene Thin Scissor. I got in contact with him, and this was like 3 years ago. And I said, "Will you talk to me?" He's in the Philippines. And I said, and he said that through an intermediary, he said that he would, that I had to pay him $10,000.
Motherfucker.
So I said, "Okay, I'll do that. And I want to interview you on video." And he said, "For $10,000. And then I was getting ready to leave, and they told me now it's $15,000. And then basically the day before I was going to the airport, he said, "Now it's $25,000. So then I said, "Okay, this is
a setup."
Yeah.
Yeah, he's going to string you along.
Yeah. So then he died about a year ago.
Of?
Who knows? It's very hard to find out
Attempting to bribe
anything
a
because it's
Kennedy.
in the Philippines.
Wow. And he fled to the Philippines immediately after?
Not immediately. You know, he's kind of got an interesting background besides being having this high intelligence classification at a series of the top military contractors. And if you're, you know, those military contractors, a lot of people who work for them are CIA. So you have to sign, they're either CIA assets or agents. You have to sign, in order to work there, in order to get the classification, you have to sign a state secrecy agreement, which makes you basically a lifetime CIA asset. And so, and he identified himself. There's a writer called Lisa Pease who really did a deep dive into him. And at one point, he identified himself as a CIA agent, and that's in her book. And so he also was extremely right-wing. And he, independent of any intelligence connections that he had, he hated my father because he thought if my father was elected president, he was going to put the blacks in charge of our country.
Was that his plan?
Yeah, that was. That was. I could finally come clean about that.
I knew I liked that guy.
It's between you and me.
It's just remarkable, man.
Wow.
It's just, yeah. I mean, it's a lot to digest. We need to have the 3-day deep dive on your uncle.
You read that book.
Oh, yeah, I'm going to check it out.
That's a really good book.
And then the other one by Talbot, you said?
By
was
David Talbot. David Talbot wrote 2 fantastic books.
Yeah.
One about my father and uncle and the CIA. But the one that you should read is Devil's Chessboard,
Yeah.
at least first. And that is about just this biography of Dulles. And if you want to talk about, a supervillain,
Yeah.
Lex Luthor.
That's
That's the guy.
When you met with Sirhan in prison, did you? This is the man that allegedly killed your father. That's what
Yeah.
the record says. Did you feel?
Oh, he was definitely involved in the ambush.
Did you feel he was guilty when you met him? Did you feel like he was remorseful? What did you feel like his energy was?
Well, first of all, he's a very gentle soul, right? He was very humble, and he cried, you know, and he also said, he cried and he held both of my hands and and put my hands to his forehead and say, thank you for coming here. Every time I saw your mom on TV with all of you guys, it would make me cry. So, you know, he was, it was an interesting conversation. You know, he had a fascination. He came from Palestine. Incidentally, you know, when my dad was killed, he was facing the death penalty. And my family all signed a letter to Judge Walker saying, please don't give him the death penalty. And then I think 3 years later, my brother Joe was hijacked. He was on a plane coming back from Pakistan, and Palestinians, Black September group, hijacked the plane. And they tried to land in Amman in Jordan, and King Hussein wouldn't let them. And so then they landed in the desert in Yemen, and they demanded the release of Sirhan initially. And then they blew up the plane and burned it, but they ultimately released my brother. I feel like people deserve justice no matter who they are.
Yeah.
And, you know, and Sirhan, you know, I'm curious about what happened with my dad. And, you know, Sirhan was just, it was interesting. It was very, very interesting. He came over here as a refugee and really had nothing, but he loved horses from when he was little. He never was on a horse. The only time he was on a horse was that time they put him on a horse, but he became a horse walker at this track.